Friday afternoon, I happened to drive by my wife's workplace and felt like dropping in. No heads up, no phone call, just the idea of taking her out for lunch. We did that kind of thing more regularly in the past, but the last few years it had become rare. Work, exhaustion, everyday life. But that particular day and time had suddenly opened up, and I thought, why not? There was a young woman at the reception desk whom I'd never seen before. She said, Vanessa. She went out to lunch with Mr. Cullen. Then she added, as usual. As usual, I repeated. She corrected herself quickly. Oh, I mean Mr. Cullen often takes the staff out, probably for work-related matters. She spoke a bit too fast, but honestly, at that moment, it didn't really register with me. In 17 years of marriage, it had never once occurred to me to question my wife. I'm not the type who monitors her phone, checks her messages, or questions her when she comes home late. After being with someone that long, you either trust them completely, or what's the point? Cullen was a major client of their company. Wealthy investor, something along those lines. Naturally, they could be having lunch about business. The receptionist had probably just chosen her words poorly. I asked for the name of the restaurant. She told me it was the Capitol Grill on Main. It was only a few blocks away. Walking down to the parking lot, I was already smiling at myself. I imagined approaching their table, shaking Cullen's hand, and Vanessa teasing me for days about my surprise detective visit. I got into the truck and drove over. I was completely confident that in half an hour we'd be laughing about this together. For the first 10 seconds inside the restaurant, it really seemed like that's how it would play out. Then I saw her. I entered a little after 1 o'clock. The dining area was half empty. The busy lunch crowd had already left. The host gave me a puzzled glance. I waved him off and started scanning for my wife. I moved further inside, checking the tables, and there she was. Vanessa sat against the far wall, her back toward me. Across from her was a heavy-built man in his 50s, wearing a gray jacket. They were speaking softly. I was about to walk straight over. Then I noticed something. Her hand rested on top of his. And she, without thinking, was gently tracing her finger along his knuckles. I stopped in place. Cullen said something to her at that moment. She laughed softly. I wanted to go over. But her voice was already in my head. You're imagining things. He's just a business contact. You've lost your mind. An hour earlier, I would have told myself the same thing. No, I wasn't going to stand there looking like a suspicious fool. First, I needed to figure out what was really going on. I stepped back behind a column near the dining room entrance. I took out my phone, took 2 quick pictures, then I turned around and left. In the parking lot, I sat in the truck, hands gripping the steering wheel. I don't know how long I stayed there. One image kept repeating in my mind. Her hand. The way her finger moved across his knuckles. That was not how you behaved at a business lunch. I had 4 hours before she returned home. And for the first time in 17 years, I didn't know how I was supposed to face her. I started the truck and drove home. At home, I sat down and began recalling things, not random memories. One particular evening. Last fall, Vanessa had a company function. I attended with her. At some point, she led me over to a large, gray-haired man. This is Mr. Cullen, our most important client. Russ, my husband. He gave me a firm handshake, said Vanessa was the best asset the firm had, and told me I was a fortunate man. I stood there proudly nodding. Then another detail returned. That entire evening, she hardly left his side. I had dismissed it as work, as keeping an important client happy. At one point I approached, and they both fell silent. I assumed it was business talk and headed to the bar. At the time, none of it seemed important. Now it meant everything. I kept thinking back, and more memories surfaced. Birthdays, holidays, she always found a reason to stop by the office for an hour or so. I had driven her there myself. I had driven her to him, that bracelet back in March. She said she bought it for herself with her bonus. I was glad for her. The new client in Dallas, the one she stayed 2 nights in the hotel for. Now I had a strong suspicion who that client really was. And then the worst realization hit me. She wasn't even trying to conceal it. She didn't need to. I was the one making excuses for everything. Client, work, important man. Any single one of those things seemed harmless. I had never connected them all because I had no reason to. Now they lined up clearly. And the receptionist today had said, as usual, calmly, casually, not like a hidden secret, like something the entire office already accepted. That's what really hurt, her colleagues knew. People who had shaken my hand at that company event, they knew what I didn't. To them, I was the fool, the husband who remained unaware. All right. If they were used to me being conveniently blind, I would let that continue for a little longer. In 2 hours, Vanessa would walk through the door, kiss me on the cheek, and ask about my day. And for the first time in 17 years, there would be one person in this house who knew more than he was letting on. That person would be me. I needed time, and now time was on my side. 2 hours later, Vanessa arrived home. She kissed me, said she was worn out from clients all day. I stayed silent. That night, I couldn't sleep. I needed something concrete. In the morning, while she was still sleeping, I opened our shared rideshare account. One account for both of us. I checked her trip history from Dallas. The records looked ordinary. Airport to the Ritz-Carlton. Pickup at 11:15 at night. The most recent trip was a couple of weeks earlier. I sat there with the phone, still searching for some innocent explanation. Late dinner with a client, room reserved for meetings. Schedule changed unexpectedly, anything. Then the bracelet memory returned. She had mentioned almost losing it at the hotel on that Dallas trip, spending half the evening looking for it in the room. I called the Ritz-Carlton in Dallas. When they answered, I said, "Hi, I'm calling for Mr. Cullen. He stayed with you 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Hargrove, Vanessa Hargrove, was with him. She left a bracelet in the room, and Mr. Cullen wanted me to check if it was found during cleaning. I heard typing on the other end. 1 moment, sir. I'm checking the system." Then I heard the confirmation I'd been dreading. "I see the reservation you're asking about, sir. Unfortunately, no bracelet was reported lost and found for that stay. But I can contact housekeeping again and call you back. No need. I'll inform Mr. Cullen, thank you." I hung up. I set the phone down and walked outside. There was nothing left to question. Saturday afternoon, I sat at the laptop and began researching Cullen. Margaret Cullen. Managing partner of an investment firm in Chicago. 55 years old. Biography on the company site, photos from conferences, an interview in a business magazine from 2 years ago. Married for 28 years. Margaret Cullen, leader of a prominent charitable foundation in Chicago. Her picture appeared on nearly every site about local philanthropy. Daughter at Stanford in her 3rd year. In one photo, Margaret with her daughter at graduation, both smiling warmly, arms linked. 28 years of marriage. A woman who likely had no idea how her husband spent his spare time. Then I visited the website of the firm where Vanessa worked. The team page, her photo, her profile, senior wealth advisor. Specializing in portfolios for major clients. At the bottom, a list of the firm's top clients. Cullen listed first. Her entire career rested on him, on his portfolio. All those years of climbing the ladder, the promotions, the March bonus, the Dallas trip, it was all tied to him. This wasn't merely an affair with a client. This was an affair her whole position depended on, which meant if her company discovered she had a personal relationship with a client, she would be fired immediately. No severance, no recommendations. It was written clearly in the contract. I leaned back in the chair. I had 3 key pieces. Margaret, who was unaware, his reputation in Chicago, and Vanessa's position at the firm. All that remained was deciding the order to use them. Monday, I started by learning everything about Margaret Cullen. I searched online, and within an hour I had what I needed. Chair of a charitable foundation, her face in magazines, her talks on YouTube, pictures from art openings, with her daughter at Stanford. With the dogs, and with Cullen in many shots. On the foundation's website, there was a notice. This coming Saturday, at 9 in the morning, the quarterly donor breakfast at the Drake Hotel in downtown Chicago. Margaret would deliver the welcome speech. Open to major donors. $5,000 entry fee. I registered and paid for the event. I booked a flight to Chicago for Friday night. In addition, I hired a private investigator in Dallas. I explained briefly. Her 2 previous stays at the Ritz-Carlton. Dates, flights, hotel. I needed all available information on this man during those dates. For days. Thursday evening, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside were 42 photographs. Vanessa and Cullen in the lobby, his hand on her waist. In the restaurant, kissing across the table. By the elevator, him whispering in her ear, her laughing. Morning in the parking lot, her getting into his car. On the back of every photo, the date, time, and location. The folder for Margaret was prepared. That evening, Vanessa asked where I was going for the weekend. I said Chicago, work, one night. She nodded and went into the bedroom. I left for the airport at 7. Saturday at 8:45, I was standing in the lobby of the Drake. Suit, dark shirt, no tie. In my hand, a thick folder containing those 42 photos. The breakfast room was on the 2nd floor. Round tables with white tablecloths, around 200 people. Coffee, pastries, quiet talk about investments. I collected my badge at registration, entered the room, and chose a table on the side. Margaret approached the microphone exactly at 9. Dark blue dress, pearls, short gray hair. She spoke for about 8 minutes. Thanked the donors, described a new program for children's hospitals, and encouraged generosity this year. Her voice was steady, accustomed to large audiences. When she stepped down from the podium, 2 or 3 people approached her immediately. I waited. Once the last person left, I stood and walked over. Mrs. Cullen. She turned and offered a polite smile. My badge read Russell Hargrove, Texas. Good morning, how may I help you? I placed the folder on the nearest table beside her coffee. She picked it up, removed a couple of photos, and froze. She said nothing. She simply stared at the top photo for several seconds. Then she placed it back inside and closed the folder. I thought you'd want to know the truth before this reaches lawyers and the media. I turned and headed toward the exit. By 1 in the afternoon, I was already flying back to Fort Worth. I reached home in the evening. Vanessa's car was in the driveway, the office light was on. I found her there. She looked upset and anxious. She set her phone down and said Cullen had blocked all her numbers, that her management had received a letter from his lawyer that morning, that he had portrayed her to the firm as a blackmailer who had been pressuring him for money to protect himself with his wife. She looked straight at me and demanded answers. Russ, what did you do? I didn't hold anything back. I told her calmly that her meetings with Cullen were no longer private, that yesterday I had been in Chicago and spoken with his wife. Vanessa froze. I added that Cullen had done what any man in his situation would do. He chose his wife, his wealth, and his foundation. Vanessa sat down without speaking. She stared at one spot. She was processing this sudden shift from the client her entire career had relied on for 7 years. The conversation ended, and I simply walked into another room, leaving her alone with the new reality. Monday evening, Vanessa received a call from her firm's security department. She answered right in front of me. The voice on the line was cold. It stated her full name, title, and employee number, informed her that all system access had been revoked, that she must return her work laptop and badge within the hour, and that she was being terminated for cause due to a serious contract violation. No severance, no references. That ended the call. The house fell silent. Vanessa stood in the middle of the kitchen holding the phone, staring at the screen as if more information might appear. 7 years of work, her biggest client, her bonuses, her trips, all gone with one phone call. She finally placed the phone on the table. She looked up at me. You did all of this. I said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. Vanessa stood there another moment, turned, and walked upstairs. Her time at the firm was finished. 2 days later, I entered the kitchen in the morning. Vanessa was sitting at the table with coffee. I opened a folder and placed the papers in front of her. Divorce papers. Standard property division terms. She looked at the first page, then at me. I told her calmly that this marriage was effectively finished. That prolonging the process would help neither of us. That the house had been mine before marriage and remained mine. That her car and her accounts would stay with her. She read quietly. I stood by the window. I didn't pressure her. She didn't argue or offer counter-proposals. She picked up a pen and signed every marked page. I took the papers, closed the folder, and drove to the lawyer. The process was completed in a few days. The marriage was officially ended, and we each moved on to new lives. I didn't hear anything directly about Cullen afterward. But a couple of months later, a brief notice appeared in the business news. He had stepped down from leading the foundation due to family reasons. Vanessa moved out by the end of that same week. Where to, I didn't ask. A month later, I learned from a mutual friend that she had gone back to her mother's house in Houston. No one in Fort Worth would hire her. In their industry, word travels fast. Monday morning, I returned to running my company. Life continued. Thanks for the likes. Subscribe. There are many more untold stories ahead.